Senator Elizabeth Warren's up for re-election this year, and Massachusetts Republicans are going to be putting up a fight.
Elizabeth Warren, well, she promised to be a champion for those in need. Instead, she gives lectures and plays politics and gets nothing done for Massachusetts. I will work day and night to make a difference in your life. I know your life struggles because I've lived them. I know your dreams and your hopes for you and your family because I share them. I will fight for what is right because I have no fear.
Cryptocurrency attorney John Deaton's gearing up to take Warren on, but how much of a chance does he stand against the two-term incumbent? Joining me to talk it through are Boston Globe columnist Joan Vennochi and UMass poll director Tatishe Nteta. Thank you both for being here. Good to see you, as always. I want to roll another little snippet from Deaton's kickoff video, and then, Joan, get you to tell us what you make of his pitch so far. Let's take a look at another segment where he strikes a populist note.
I fought for the little guy. I took on the greedy corporations and the heartless insurance companies, and I won. I took on the Washington insiders, and I won. I am running for U.S. Senate to continue my life's mission to shake things up for the people who need it most. Take on the drug and insurance companies for better, more accessible health care. Instead of just pointing the fingers at each other.
So, Joan Vennochi, what do you think of Deaton's pitch so far?
Well, do you remember Scott Brown and his pickup truck? I mean, this is Scott Brown on steroids, right? It's like the anti-elitist everyman. I mean, I think this pitch is, powerful in a way and with a really visceral, connection, but he says nothing about where he stands on any issues or how he would vote on things like, abortion or immigration or all the things that we sort of, associate with Elizabeth Warren. And I think that in this political environment with Washington as polarized as it is and every vote counting, it's hard to imagine a Republican sneaking into a Senate seat the way Scott Brown did, especially one who just moved here.
Tatishe, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think he definitely plays on emotions, particularly the anger that may be up, seen in voters in the state. But he needs to make a stronger case as to why it is a two-term senator who's brought $50 billion back to the state in federal funding needs to be replaced in 2024. And as Joan mentioned, given the polarized nature of our politics, the fact that that Massachusetts is a relatively strong blue state, a Republican attempting to, knock off a two-term incumbent needs to make a much more clear, specific, and stronger case for why it is that Warren needs to be ousted.
You mentioned $50 billion that Warren has helped to bring back to Massachusetts, something she made sure to note as soon as Deaton kicked off his candidacy. She released information documenting what she's been able to do financially for Massachusetts. Tatishe, the UMass poll has been regularly tracking how Massachusetts residents feel about Warren and other politicians in the state. How do feelings about her compare to feelings about other electeds?
Yeah, she remains a popular figure in the Commonwealth. So 55% from our last poll indicate that she's done a good job or approve of the job that she's done. That's only second to Governor Maura Healey. She ranks higher than her fellow Senator Markey, ranks higher than the Mass State Legislature and other statewide officials. And so she remains extremely popular in the state. She's popular amongst a number of important groups that tend to turn out to vote on Election Day. That includes women, the highly educated, and the wealthier members of our community. And so, it's going to be a really difficult road if Deaton wants to knock off Warren.
And my recollection is that in addition to the groups that you mentioned, she also fares especially well with voters of color, right?
Yeah, so people of color, close to 60%, a little over 60%, approve of the job that she's doing, as well as young people. And so her coalition reflects the sort of strong progressive coalition that, got her into office to beat Scott Brown and then to gain re-election in 2018. And it looks like she's going to look to those same groups to turn out to vote in a presidential election year, which is a pretty good bet. And so Deaton's going to have to come up with, again, a clear agenda, clear message to mobilize the voters that are going to need to, again, more strongly challenge Senator Warren.
Joan, 4 years ago, Elizabeth Warren ran for president, and I vividly remember a point, because I was covering her campaign fairly regularly, a point where it looked like she was the Democratic frontrunner and might be the Democratic nominee. She ended up not being the Democratic nominee. On Super Tuesday here in Massachusetts, she finished behind both Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, which a lot of people have described since then as a kind of a humbling coda to her campaign. Do you think that that finish, going back 4 years, is cause for concern for Warren in any way?
That had to hurt, right? She lost the left to Bernie and she lost the center to Biden. But a presidential campaign is different than a Senate election. And as we just heard, her polling numbers remain strong. I don't know if she has quite the same emotional connection that she did when she first came onto the scene in Massachusetts. If you remember, there was a time when everything that she said went viral. When she took on the CEOs, like those would be clips that would go around and really, became this viral sensation. And I don't know if she can quite, sort of recapture that. On the other hand, as we know from history, it's just very, very hard for a Republican to win in Massachusetts. Bill Weld tried against John Kerry and he couldn't do it. And John Kerry wasn't beloved. I think, she has that coalition and that holds for her. And she's Deaton is really going to have an uphill climb.
Tatishe, what's your take on the presidential result 4 years ago and what it might mean today, if anything?
Yeah, so, looking back on our polling, the central issue that Democratic voters in the primary were looking for in their candidate was someone to beat Trump. And so, the voters in Massachusetts clearly enjoy Senator Warren, at least Democratic voters do, Senator Warren in that position, but had some questions as to whether or not she was going to be able to defeat President Trump. And so this may be a reflection of, fears of 2016 all over again and the role of sexism in shaping the votes of the nation. But it also may just reflect the sort of momentum that Biden had and the strength that Bernie had amongst the progressive wing. As it pertains to a Senate election, I think the story of Massachusetts for my lifetime has been, we support candidates that can bring back the bacon. And it is no surprise, as you said, Adam, that one of the things that she released as soon as Deaton said that he was running was all of the money that she brought back to the Commonwealth. And that is something that we as voters here in Massachusetts tend to view in a positive light. And the fact that since Biden has been in office, she has brought back $20 billion. So in the last 3 years, according to her reports. And so I think she's trying to make the case that she's in line both, in terms of the ideology of the state, but also is doing her job effectively in sort of making sure that the interests of Massachusetts are represented in the halls of Congress.
So I
Adam,
feel,
can I just jump in for a minute?
by all
I was
means.
just going to say, I think that's a really important point. And I was just thinking about that Cape Cod bridge, and when the money wasn't coming in, people were comparing it unfavorably to the Ted Kennedy days. But now that it seems to be moving forward, that bringing home the bacon really is very important for a senator.
I feel like the rhythm that we've established here, because of me, is I'll bring up what might be a possible source of concern for Warren, and one of you will tell me, or both of you will tell me, and she probably doesn't need to be worried about that. And then I'll try again, and then I'll try again. I'm going to make yet another try. Tatishe, one of the findings in your October UMass poll was that Massachusetts voters pretty strongly support the idea of a constitutional amendment establishing an age limit for senators, a maximum age limit. 47% strongly supported that idea, 29% somewhat supported it, and the average age of an upwards limit that they supported imposing was 67 years. So I'll ask again, is that possibly cause for concern for Elizabeth Warren, who is, I believe, 74 years old right now?
Yeah, I think there's a national discussion, and, the Bay State is part of that discussion about how old is too old to be in these positions of power and what it means for one generation to sort of cede to the next generation. I think this is an area of potential weakness for Senator Warren. As you said, she's 74 years old. And at the presidential level, there's a lot of discussions for both Biden and Trump about their mental acuity, their physical acuity, their level of energy and enthusiasm for the job, and what that will look like 4 years down the line. So this might be a way in which Deaton can, resonate with voters. The issue here is that there's little evidence that Elizabeth Warren has lost a step, whether that is in terms of her energy and enthusiasm in the job, her mental acuity and her physical acuity. So, he may make that point, but I think the proof is in the pudding, and it doesn't look like Elizabeth Warren slowed down any less than she has when she first stepped onto the political scene.
It's going back a few years, but I mentioned covering her presidential campaign 4 years ago, and I do recall being continually bowled over at the energy she demonstrated on the stump. She was pretty much every single day more energetic than I ever have been in my life and ever hope to be. So, Joan Vennochi, how do you think the age issue might play out?
Well, it's funny that you should mention that. I mean, she actually met with the Ed Board at the Globe on Thursday, and my first reaction to her appearance there was just how much of energy and enthusiasm she brought to the meeting, and how if only Biden could display a fraction of that, he could put to rest a lot of these questions that are out there. Yeah, I mean, age is very much part of the debate right now, but it's more than a number. It's how you come across. And maybe it is generational, but when I look at her, I mean, I don't see an old person. I see a person who's really sort of engaged and, fully able to, prosecute the case for why she should be reelected.
Joan, John Deaton is working with Jim Conroy, who helped Charlie Baker sort of identify and strike this perfectly calibrated political balance as a moderate Republican governing Massachusetts during the Trump era. So far, though, his tone is not Baker-esque, I would argue. We've seen little, clips from his kickoff video that suggest how he's presenting himself. I want to read from a tweet that he sent back in December 2023. I have no idea if Jim Conroy helped him craft this or not at the time, but he tweeted back in December 2023, "Is there time for me to buy a home in Massachusetts, actually move there and run for Senate against this government overreach hack in 2024? That's a reference to Elizabeth Warren, of course. He says, "I'm a Mass lawyer. I've practiced in Mass for 15 years. I live in Rhode Island, less than 6 miles from Seekonk. I'm not suggesting I would win, but how I would love to confront her." Does that combative tone, do you think, suggest an approach that's going to resonate with independent voters in Massachusetts who could be decisive in this race?
Well, first of all, you're right. I mean, Charlie Baker was perfectly calibrated for the 8 years that he was governor. And I guess we can, credit Jim Conroy for coming up with it, or Baker, properly, reflecting that image. I don't know. I mean, we're in different times right now. I think even in Massachusetts, there's an anger right now that wasn't there even a year or two ago, whether it's about migrants or whether it's about communities who are being told they should have housing that they don't necessarily want.
That's a good point.
So, there is an anger out there that can be tapped into. How that works in a Senate campaign, I don't necessarily see that as a really strong way to wage a campaign against Elizabeth Warren. Honestly, I'd be more concerned if he were running for governor against Maura Healey. I think that that's that for those of us with a long political memory, that's like an Ed King versus a Michael Dukakis, like somebody who taps into an anger against maybe a more intellectual approach to things.
All right, before we wrap up, Tatishe, anything else that we've missed that we should highlight?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the central themes that is likely going to come out of this Senate election is the fact that Deaton is not from Massachusetts. He was a few weeks ago living in the state of Rhode Island and just recently moved to Massachusetts. And whether or not that is going to be an overarching issue, an important issue, I think voters are going to consider a lot of these things, a lot of these characteristics that Deaton has provided. But also he's behind the eight ball. He just started his campaign in the last weeks of February. Most Senate campaigns have been going for, a year now. And so he's going to have to introduce himself to the voters here in Massachusetts and make a case. Or he may be just viewed as a carpetbagger coming in and attempting to unseat an extremely popular incumbent senator. And the likelihood of that is probably very low.
All right, we got to leave it there. Tatishe Nteta, Joan, Vennochi, thank you both as always. Good to see you.
Thank you.